Well, I just got back from Modern Horizons 3 pre-release, and let me tell you, it was a frigging blast. Just like Modern Horizons 2, the limited environment for this is fantastic to play in. There's only one problem. It's really, really expensive. And I don't think it should be. I really don't like the whole, this is premium product, we used cocaine laced ink this time, and that makes it more expensive. Like, no, not really. It's not more expensive because of anything besides Wizards and Hasbro by extension just going, these suckers will pay anything for this. So to get around that problem, let's go ahead and act like real budget players, and let's find the diamonds in the rough. It's not really a whole lot of rough, though, of Modern Horizons 3. Like with the last few sets, I want to go over some of the best budget picks you can grab from this set, with a few exceptions. So typically I try to make sure all the cards I grab from the set are under $1, but there are a couple that are part of a slew of new cards that I need to talk about, and some of them just happen to be in the $2 range. So they'll be here as well. But for all the cards I'm going to talk about, it's going to cost you a grand total of $28 to get all... How many is that? 72 of them. Jesus Christ, that's a lot this time. Anyway, let's get into things. Let's go ahead and begin with some budget commanders. These are all under $1, and they can be either in the 99 of decks that support them, or be just the front-forward face of a new deck that you want to build. Genku the Future Saber is wonderful for any kind of blinking deck, because with a non-token permanent, leaves the battlefield. You can create any of these things: a 2/2 white fox, a 1/2 blue moonfolk, or a 1/1 black rat, and then you can pay 5 to put a 1/1 counter on every creature you control. I think this is going to be a wonderful blink commander, as it establishes a board in and of itself with its effect, and while there are other commanders that do this effect as well, he can easily slot into the 99 of those decks for blink strategies. Imsker Iron Eater is something I'm personally going to be building, as I love affinity for artifacts as an effect, or as a build around effect, and it has a draw engine attached to it that is perfectly synergistic with the artifact strategy as well. Wait until I make a deck for this. I'm going to make a $15 deck for this for the channel, and then I may end up making a full power version as well if I end up building this in paper and having fun with it. But I'm going to build a 15 version first and then go from there. This guy looks really fun. Then we have Kudo, King Among Bears. This makes all creatures have base power and toughness 2/2 and turns them all into bears. There's some nasty stuff you can do with this. If you want to be a dick at the table, you can play something like Elish Norn to guarantee that nobody gets a chance at playing creatures ever, but I personally think that's kind of a dick move, because, you know, we all like playing the game. And then we have Pearlier Imperial Ambassador. This is slotting into my Galea deck now, but as its own build-around commander, it's also fantastic. But in the 99 of any Enchantress deck, it's really cool. Enchantment spells have affinity for auras, so they cost 1 less for every aura you have, and if you cast an aura spell that targets a modified permanent, so something that has an aura, equipment, or a counter on it, then you'll automatically draw a card. It's a little more restrictive than something, say, Sithist Harvest Hands, but it's still an incredibly powerful auras commander. But again, I think just like most of the things on this list, this can fit really well into the 99 of a dedicated auras deck as well. Having more enchantresses in those decks is always a good thing for the draw power they supplement your deck with. And at 62 cents, I can put this as my own. I'm going to make this a $15 deck as well. This goes in the 99 of any enchantress deck, but also I'm going to make this into a $15 deck. It's going to be easy. It's going to be fun. So I just spent a decent bit of time updating my lands guide video, so if you haven't seen that already, please go check it out. But also, the lands guide itself is not as up to date as everything that is currently in the Moxfield list, because the first thing I want to talk about is these lovely things we just got here. These are the landscape lands, and they are all fantastic for budget builds, and they're all ridiculously affordable, and I can't wait to start putting these in my budget decks, because 3-color decks tend to be harder to build on a strict budget, since it is harder to get everything you need as early as possible. These guys are fantastic at managing that problem, though. You know how Evolving Wilds can tap with no cost to grab a land from your deck tapped? And you know how I love Promising Vein, Shire Terrace, and the Panoramas for their ability to give mana untapped when you need it, so that you don't always have to have this land as a tapped land? Well, these are both of those ideas combined together. Bountiful landscape, contaminated, deceptive, foreboding, sheltering, shattering, you name it. All of these are in each and every triple color combination in terms of what types of lands they are fetchable. Thank goodness Wizards of the Coast did not once again print a half cycle of lands for us. They instead printed a full cycle of lands for us, and all of these have the ability to not only be an Evolving Wilds if they need to, be a Panorama if they need to, but they also have the ability to cycle themselves from your hand for a draw if you find yourself lacking in draw power in your deck and you find yourself flooded on lands. These are an amazing addition to any budget deck, and I highly recommend running them. I basically traded for all of the ones I could while I was at the event because nobody values these things, but I do, damn it! Past that, let's talk about every other thing that I found in this set that is fantastic. Cranial Ram is wonderful for Artifacts Matters decks in that it's another Nettle Cyst or Cranial Plating style effect, with the sad fact that it can only be ran in Rakdos decks, so we don't get to put it in like mono blue decks or Voltron decks that are equipment style that aren't in these colors, but it's still a living weapon style effect that gives us a cranial plating effect where all of our artifacts count towards the power of a creature. And it also adds 1 toughness, which matters sometimes. It actually mattered a lot when I was playing in pre-release. Furnace Hellkite is another interesting include here. It's an overcosted dragon, but with affinity for artifacts, you can actually slot it into regular dragon decks that are just trying to use a bunch of artifact ramp to get themselves up to the amount they need to play their big, dirtily costed dudes. The Furnace Hellkite's basically a Shivan dragon that gets its cost cut down by that, so it's fantastic for budget decks. Marionette Apprentice is perfect in every way, and I hope none of you ever fucking hurt her. She's an aristocrat that makes a token, and that makes her neat. She also has a just adorable little spider, and that is the only thing to love about her. Probably. Wormcoil Larva is also a really neat one. I'm not doing that just to cut away from the simping from a random Magic the Gathering card. The Larva is a Wormcoil engine cut in half. Instead of a 6/6 that turns into 2 3/3s, it's a 3/3 that turns into a 1/2 and a 2/1, but otherwise it's the same thing as a Wormcoil engine. Death Touch, Lifelink, it makes 2 tokens that have Death Touch and Lifelink, split between the 2 of them, and for 1 mana less, if you're running an Artifacts Matters aristocrat style deck, like say Glissa or even Braids, then Wormcoil Larva is going to do you a lot of good. We have another artifact to look at here in Drossclaw, another living weapon that gives a creature the ability to burn each opponent for 1 life whenever it swings. This is an auto-include in any, say, Rakdos decks, and I mean Rakdos, the big boy Rakdos, that discounts all of your cards by 1 mana for every single life lost among your opponents this turn. This is an easy, repeatable way in black to make sure that your cards are discounted by 3 every single turn in decks like that. Next up is Tune the Narrative, which looks like it's supposed to be for energy decks since it draws you a card and gives you 2 energy, but that's a little deceiving. I think the card's going to see a ton of play as an additive in decks like Talrun the Sky Summoner and Lord of Nazgul. This is because Tune the Narrative, like Opt and Consider, is a 1 mana cantrip that replaces itself, which is incredibly important in decks that generate tokens or other value off of just casting instants and sorceries. This will not directly replace any of those cards, as it is less powerful than most of them in generic decks, but it will be an important include in those decks by making sure that they have access to as many 1 mana cantrips as humanly possible, as that is the bread and butter of those decks and how they build their boards. Next up, Counters Matter decks get another Hardened Scales ability that is really, really cool. I think this is going to slot super well into Mothman decks. This Cursed Wombat for 2 mana makes it to where anytime your permanents would get a 1/1 counter, they get an additional 1 once per turn, and that is once per turn per each one, so you don't have to worry about any weird layering or anything like that. This is a extra Hardened Scales that we can reanimate if we need to, and that's what makes it really cool to me. Also, just in general, having something that can drop down in, say, a Mothman deck and automatically be its own Hardened Scale along with, say, the Kami that does that as well as a ramping creature is fantastic in decks like that. Sometimes having these effects on creatures actually makes them a lot more powerful. Then we have the Metastatic Evangel, which is another really neat include here. if a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to proliferate. This is a very tricky card to judge because I want to say this will work really well in Super Friends decks, but at the same time, those decks tend to use token creatures for defense, not non-token creatures for defense. So you are going to be the judge over how well this card is going to work in your decks. I think that if I could get this to work in, say, my Galadriel Blink deck, then it would be a way to give all of my elves extra 1/1 counters who already have them, but you be the judge of how this card is going to get used. Then for draw, we've got Serum Visionary. Again, we're on that Blink train. This is Serum Visions, but on a creature, which is amazing for Blink decks, because now we have access to a card that not only draws us a card when it touches the battlefield, but will also scry for us when it touches the battlefield, making it easier to dig deeper in those decks. Glint the Impossible is Impulse Draw that makes Eldrazi Scions for every card we don't use from said Impulse Draw, but it exiles 3 cards from your library instead of 2, like something like Ren's Resolve, but it does make you use them until the beginning of the next end step, as opposed to the next turn's end step, like something like Ren's does. And since it's a sorcery spell, unless you've got like Leyline of Anticipation, it's going to be hard to get this at a stage where it'll work 100% of the time for you. Other Impulse Draw tends to be a little better at that, but I think this is still going to see play in a lot of decks, especially because any card you don't use will just turn into an Eldrazi Scion. So aristocrat decks that want to see lots of tokens on the board that have red might end up using this as a pseudo token creator / draw card. Speaking of draw, Eviscerator's Insight also lets us draw cards by blowing up an artifact or creature on our board, and this is a common enough effect in most sets, but I like it a lot in this set because it has flashback, and that is a huge upgrade from some of the other versions of this effect that we've had. Yes, it costs 1 more than something like Village Rites, and no, it doesn't make the extra treasure like something like Deadly Dispute, but the fact that we can flash it back means in decks like, say, Lord of Nazgul, that really want to see a single spell cast multiple times so that it can get max value out of it, Eviscerator's Insight is going to slot really well into those decks. And if you like top deck manipulation, Brain Surge is a new version of Brainstorm. For 3 mana, you draw 4 and then put 2 instead of draw 3, put 2. I think this is a wonderful inclusion in top deck manipulation decks like, say, my Galea deck, or, say, anything that likes using Reality Chip. Using Brain Surge, Brainstorm, and Dream Cache all together in a deck along with Brainstone gives you tons of budget options for manipulating that top of your deck for various effects. And I think you're gonna find that this is gonna slot super well on something like, say, Emperor Mihal as well, since that wants to cast Merfolks from the top. Just any deck that cares about the top of the deck is really gonna benefit from this. Then we've got Eldrazi stuff, because this set is entirely focused on Eldrazi for the most part. This It that heralds the end, it makes your colorless spells cost 1 less, and it gives your colorless creatures 1/1. That last effect isn't super important, since most of the time Eldrazi are gigantic, but that first effect, discounting our stuff, is really, really good. Idol of the False Gods can make Eldrazi spawns that can give us mana, and also can become its own Eldrazi over time. It's a pretty nifty token generation tool for those kinds of decks. Path of Annihilation can also make Eldrazi tokens, but this gives all of your Eldrazi the ability to tap for mana of any color, accelerating those decks into oblivion effectively. Skittering Precursor also can make Eldrazi tokens every time you sacrifice a creature. This is not just great for Eldrazi decks, but also great for any aristocrat deck that is in red, since the Skittering Precursor will replace any of our non-tokens with Eldrazi Scions that can sacrifice themselves for mana with their own effects. If you've got something like a Phyrexian Altar or something like that, then this is going to help you make tons and tons and tons of mana in an aristocrat deck. Then we've got some ramp pieces new to this set. Planar Genesis is a power creep of Growth Spiral. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put a land from among them onto the battlefield. If you don't, then put any card from among them into your hand and put the rest onto your library in the bottom of any order. This is 100% a power creep over Growth Spiral, and I think in decks that really want to ramp, this is going to find a lot of use in those decks. You have the ability to use it as a draw spell. You have have the ability to use it as a ramp spell. You pick what it needs to be, and it will be that card. Charitable Levy is also a great ramp piece for white, because every set needs to give white something new, I guess. But this is a stacks piece that makes non-creature spells cost 1 more, just like a Thalia, and it's costed like a Thalia as well. But if a player casts a non-creature spell, you put collection counter on it, and then if there are 3 or more counters, draw a card, then search your library for any planes, even dual type planes, and put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This is a powerhouse, and I'm surprised it's sitting at only 25 cents, but all the prices of all the singles in this set are currently in free fall, so who knows what it's going to end up being. Sneaky Snacker's also a really interesting card that had a lot of utility for me in the pre-release, but I think it's going to have a lot of utility in the game of Commander as well, because when you draw your 3rd card, return it to the battlefield tapped. This has no restrictions, so let's say, for instance, you're running an Aristocrats deck that sacrifices a creature and draws a card. Pretty common enough. Sneaky Snacker hits the grave, draw a card. Then if you've got something like, say, that Skittering Precursor that is replacing it with a token whenever it dies, and remember, you can have multiple versions of these, like this and Blightmound on the board. That will create more than 1 token when the Sneaky Snacker dies. Sacrificing those 2 tokens will draw you more cards, and then, boom, the Sneaky Snacker is popping up on the board again. Most of these effects happen at instant speed, so if you are waiting until each opponent's turn in their turn cycle, then you'll be able to use this on each person's turn, effectively letting you get through 12 cards of your deck while having a repeatable, non-token sacrificable creature, which is really powerful. Also, in decks like, say, the new Gonti deck, this is also helpful in those kinds of decks, because it's very easy for those decks to draw 2 extra cards at least a turn by using cards like Bident of Thassa, since they are combat-focused decks that want evasive creatures. Sneaky Snacker will be able to constantly put itself back on the board even when the board gets wiped, effectively making sure that those strategies always have access to those creatures. I think the card's fantastic in a lot of different decks. And then we've got the Izzet Genitorium, one of many energy cards that I think is great for this new set, but most of the really cool ones are in the Commander deck, and I'm not really going over that right now, but the Izzet Genitorium can basically give you a Hardened Scales version of energy. Anytime you would get 1 or more energy, get that many +1, and then it has a draw power effect attached to it as well if you've paid or lost 4 or more energy this turn. I think that if I were to switch, say, my Liberty Prime deck into a more energy focused deck, then the Izzet Genitorium would find a easy place to be in that deck. But dedicated energy decks are starting to crop up now on EDH Rec, because people are realizing that, oh, there's enough energy stuff to play with these effects now, so we'll see what happens with this. Evolution Witness is a recursion piece in this set as well that is, oh my god, I slotted this into Galadriel automatically because it is an elf, but anytime a 1/1 counter is put on it, return a target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Mothman Called. Every single time a rad counter gets stripped away with Mothman's effect and you get to put a counter on something, just put it on the Evolution Witness and just start taking permanents from your graveyard and shoving them into your hand. Grab fetch lands from your graveyard, put them in your hand so you never miss land drops. Grab important board pieces your opponents have knocked away and throw them back into your hand. This thing is nutty. I don't understand how this thing got printed only at common. If you have any of these, I will trade them with you, especially if you've got foil pretty versions of them, because this is a wonderful new card for Counters Matters decks and decks that just have the ability to get counters as a secondary effect. And it's costed the same as Evolution Witness, and unlike Evolution Witness, is actually an elf, so it benefits from elf strategies as well, way more than Ewit ever did. I think this is a great card. Then we've got Pyretic Rebirth as well. Return any artifact or creature from your graveyard to your hand, and then deal damage equal to that card's mana value to one creature or planeswalker. A 4-mana removal spell is a little hefty, but it also serves double duty by being able to yank a card out of our graveyard that we might have lost and just use all of its power to aim at an opponent and burn them. I think this is going to see play in any deck that really wants to recur things while having access to removal, which is, you know, lots of decks out there, but the decks I think are going to benefit from this the most are things like Niv-Mizzet Reborn decks that really want to see cards that have 2 pips and have very, very powerful effects. For 39 cents, this is an easy include in decks like that. But while we're thinking of removal, there's a lot of really cool removal in this deck I want to talk about. Utter Insignificance is a flash enchantment Frogify that makes a creature lose all abilities and toughness and makes it have base power 1/1. But this is a interesting effect in that not only does it frogify a card, but if that card is about to become a problem, we can instantly exile the card at any point by paying 3 mana. This at flash speed means that we can interrupt infinite combos and do all kinds of nutty stuff with an aura enchantment, and having more access to blue exile removal is great in budget decks. For 18 cents, kind of a no-brainer include in Auras Matters decks that want easy access to removal that will still trigger things like Sithis Harvest Hand. Horrific Assault is another cool card. Every single set gives us a type of fight spell for green usually, but this gives us a green fight spell that costs only 1 mana. This kind of effect originally existed only in Blizzard Brawl, as far as I remember, because it gave Indestructible in fight. This is doing similar for us while letting us just add more removal to those green decks. I think you're gonna find that putting a few of these in mono green decks lets them deal with a lot of problems, but having access to it for 1 mana, just the more the merrier. Trickster Elk is Kenrith's transformation, but with Bestow instead of being a card that draws us a card. It's weaker in some ways and stronger in others in that it's also a creature if we need it to be. I think you'll find some places for this as well. Mono green removal giving us access to things other than just fight spells is still useful. Treat this like another copy of Lignify. Thraben Charm is a modal card in this set as well that can blow up an enchantment, deal twice the number of creatures you have as damage to a card, or exile any number of cards from people's graveyards, or exile any number of target players' graveyards. There is no mode on this that is not straight gas. Then we have Siege Smash, which there's a very specific type of deck I think this is going to be good in. A 2 mana blow up an artifact or a combat trick seems like it's not a whole lot to write home about until you remember that Feather is a commander. Being able to use Siege Smash on Feather over and over and over again so that you constantly have access to it in later turns, and then just changing it into its removal spell side when you need it to be one, is a wonderful added option for decks like Feather. Breathe Your Last is a bog standard murder reprint that it gives us access to more budget removal. That's all it is, really. Accursed Marauder is a power creep, a Fleshbag Marauder, and it's only power crept in the sense that it's a non-token creature it kills, and also it's 2 mana instead of 3. I preferred when these were 3 mana, but I guess that's how power creep goes. Collective Resistance is our standard blow up an artifact, blow up an enchantment, or get something else effect, but in this case, it's giving a creature hexproof and indestructible. This is a Tameo safekeeping. And oh wait, what's that? It says choose 1 or more? Oh no. Riku decks are going to rejoice at this thing. But most importantly, the fact that we can just pay 4 mana, protect our commander, blow up an artifact, and blow up an enchantment. Just that person has Omniscience and the other person had the audacity to play a Soul Ring. Guess they all go bye-bye, and our commander lives through the board wipe too. Consuming Corruption is also sweet in this set. If you're playing a mono black deck, this deals X damage to a creature or planeswalker and you gain X life, where X is the number of swamps you control. Budget decks really like this because it's mono black removal for pennies, but also non-budget decks that have access to things like Urborg are going to see that this is a house in terms of getting them tons and tons of life back when they need it. Grim Servant is also great for these black decks because for your devotion to black, you get to tutor any card out of your deck when it comes onto the battlefield. For 4 mana, it's a diabolic tutor with a restriction, but also on a body. This is blinkable. This is recurable. This is very, very dangerous to put in, say, oh, I don't know, an Esper Blink deck. That would be a very scary thing to see in a deck like that. 1 mana pip from the commander, 1 mana pip from the Grim Servant, and now every time you blink, you have a chance to grab any counterspell or removal you need from the deck, because it searches any card, not just black cards. It can also grab lands if your devotion isn't high enough to get anything. I'm remaking Budget Sephiroth and I'm putting Grim Servant in. It has to happen. Then we have Muster the Departed. This is an enchantment for Tokens Matters decks. Whenever it enters the battlefield, make a white spirit token, and at the beginning of your end step, if any creature died, populate. This is an interesting include. I think this is mostly going to see play in any kind of, well, obviously Tokens Matters populate deck, but also Aristocrats decks, because those decks will always have creatures dying on their turn, and they'll always have some kind of creature token to get the populate effect from. This being able to give you an extra copy of, say, your Ophiomancer token or your Jadar token or anything like that is going to be perfectly reasonable in those kinds of decks. Mindless Conscription is also great because it gives you an amassed zombies 3 token, so a 3/3 zombie, anytime that you draw your third card each turn. I think this is going to be wonderful in, say, a Sauron deck that wants to see a bunch of amassed orcs. This will attach zombies to its typing and give it 3 more 1/1 counters, but also this says anytime you draw your third card in a turn, you're gonna get a free token. Aristocrat decks always draw 1, 2, 3 cards a turn because they're always using things like Greed and Sack Outlets and Dockside Chef and just any number of these things. Mindless Conscription is gonna do a lot of work in decks like that. Also, Thieving decks just got a crab. That is all. The Crabomination can emerge from an artifact, making its mana cost negligible, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent exiles the top card of their library, a card at random from their graveyard, and any card at random from their hand, and then you can cast any of these without paying their mana costs. This is insane. I think I have one of these, and I'm shoving it in Gaunty. I'm going to make it emerge from a mana rock. And that's going to be just all I need to be happy. Voltron decks also get access to some new things. Dog Umbra can be a prison card while also being a totem armor for the player who needs it. Essence Reliquary can bounce a Voltron commander back to your hand, putting all auras that were attached to it to your hand as well if you need it to. This is a neat protection effect if you want it to be one, but I think the most important thing this can be when you need it to be is those decks have a tendency to storm off. So Essence Reliquary will let you bounce any of your creatures who have a ton of discounted auras on them already into your hand, letting you re-storm off if you want to. Otherwise, being able to just put everything in your hand when you know somebody's, say, tutored up a removal spell is a reasonable thing to do. Just make sure you've got a Reliquary Tower down so you don't lose any of the cards you threw back up to your hand. Golden Tail Trainer's also neat from this set. It makes all your auras and equipments cost X less, where X is its power, and when it attacks, all your modified creatures get XX, where X is its power. This is a fantastic lieutenant in any kind of aura or equipment Voltron strategies, so I want to see what you guys do with him. But that's about it for all of the regular cards in this set. I mentioned that I have one more section I need to get into that are cards that are not quite all under $1, but I have to talk about them all as a group. You'll understand why here in just a second. These are some things that I am more excited for than anything else in this set. Let's get into it. In previous videos, I have waxed lyrical about how much I love modal dual-faced cards, and for this set, we have been given 20 of them, 2 in each color and 1 in each color combination. This is a fantastic include for this set, and I can't wait to play with these in regular paper games, and I can't wait to see the prices of these cards just drop into free fall so that we can start using them in $15 decks as well. In no particular order, let's go ahead and go over each of these one by one so you can see why I'm so excited. So, just so you know, the idea of a modal dual-faced card is it is a land on one side and a card that you can play as a spell on the other. They are usually overcosted for one side, and the other side usually comes into play tapped. But that's a bit strange, since in this set, if you're a monocolored card, then you don't come into play tapped. You just pay 3 life to make sure that the card comes into play untapped. And this is true for all of the monocolored versions of these cards, while all the dual-colored versions are forced to come into play tapped. I think that coming into play tapped is usually a perfectly reasonable trade-off for the card being a card that you play as a spell 50% of the time in a land, the other 50% of the time. But since we now have access to dual-colored modal dual-faced cards, maybe that power balance is shifting a little bit. But I guess my mouse is on Drowner of the Truth, so let's start with this one. This is a 7/6 Eldrazi that when you cast, if you can cast a colorless mana on it specifically, it'll make 2 Eldrazi spawns as well. I think that there's a few decks you can find use for this in, but otherwise, it's just a free include if you're already putting in some tapped lands anyway. Then we've got Stump Stomp. Target creature deals damage equal to its power to a creature or planeswalker you don't control. This is a fight spell for 45 cents. That's a land on the other side. Strength of the Harvest is a ridiculously powerful new MDFC, giving a creature 1/1 for every creature and enchantment you control. That is nutty. That is nutty. It says and or, but I don't know why it says and or for this particular effect. And of course, it is a Selesnya land on the backside. Waterlogged Teaching is another dual flavored card here that can tutor any instant from your deck or any card with flash, which means we can get things like that Necron Deathmark I love so much from the deck into our hand. And of course, it is a Dimir land on the backside. Revitalizing Repast is also wonderful. Gives a creature a 1/1 counter and indestructible until end of turn while being a Golgari land on the backside. Then we've got Glasswing Grace. This can enchant a creature to give it 2/2 flying and lifelink. A little overcosted for that. I'd say about 2 or 3 mana overcosted for that, but if it's free include in your deck due to the Orzhov backside, then fucking go for it. Legion Leadership is ridiculously powerful. Voltron decks having access to instant cast Double Strike is really, really cool. Well, it's not really Double Strike. It doubles a creature's power and gives it first strike. There's a really important distinction to be made there, but let's be honest, if you run this in any deck, you're going to be putting this in Feather. It's a land when you don't have your lands, and when you don't need it to be that Boros land on the backside, it's just going to be constantly doubling Feather's power, making it harder and harder to deal with her. Then we've got Blood-Soaked Insight. This is another great card. It's just Rakdos, 1 less for every 1 life your opponents have lost per turn, so we can potentially play it for 2. Target opponent exiles the top 3 of their library, and then you can play those cards until the end of your next turn. It's Impulse Thieving. Impulse Thieving. Isn't that exciting? It's just a weird thing we have access to. And of course, it's a Rakdos land on the backside. For Azorius, we have Suppression Ray, which is mostly going to see play in decks like Hilda. But aside from that, I don't think it's going to see too much play. Again, Azorius land on the backside. If you're just putting a tapped land in your deck, put this card in your deck anyways. Why not? Rush of Inspiration is a Thrill of Possibility that makes you lose the card at random instead of your choice for 3 mana instead of 2. But to be fair, it is a land on the backside, and it does generate any... it does make you pay energy to not lose the card at random if you have a dedicated energy deck. But that's enough of the dual-flavored cards. Let's look at the ones that are in a single color. Sundering Eruption can blow up a land, and it's just land removal on a land. That's really good. You may not like land removal, but I don't like Glacial Chasm. Pinnacle Monk has prowess, and also when it enters the battlefield, you get to recur an instant or sorcery from your grave to your hand. And of course, it is a bolt land on the backside. Not a shock land, a bolt land. Sorry about that. Then we have in blue the Hydroelectric Specimen. When it enters the battlefield, change the target of any instance or sorcery spell with a single target to it. This can save your commander in a lot of situations. It's a spell skite. It's a flashy spell skite with a bolt land on the back. Then we have Sink into Stupor. It's a remand. It's a 3-mana remand. Return a spell or a non-land permanent to an opponent's hand. It's a boomerang remand. It's a Rima boomerang. And of course, it's a bolt land. Boggart Trawler starts our black cards, and it's Bojuka Bog. It's a goblin in Bojuka Bog, so it gets rid of a player's graveyard while being a bolt land on the backside. And then my favorite MDFC from all of this has been Fell the Profane. Destroy a creature or planeswalker while being a bolt land on the backside. I can't tell you how happy I am that people are now realizing why I love Hagramauling. Now that the card is a bolt land on the backside, they're like, oh, it's so good. Like, no, this effect has always been good. One more mana for a murder that has the ability to fix my mana it's always been good. But, you know, it's just gooder now. Razor Grass Ambush can deal 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature while also being a land on the backside. I think this is mostly going to be in any deck that cares about Iganjo already, but the one that I think is most exciting is the Witch Enchanter. This enters the battlefield blowing up an artifact or an enchantment an opponent controls. That's right, we have a Reclamation Sage in white for $1.35. Now we have 2 of these. We had Lauren of the Third Path, and now we got Witch Enchanter. Just the fact that this is a land when we need it to be, while also being a Reclamation Sage / Lauren, is great. But finally, we've got the green cards. Bridgeworks Battle gives a creature 2/2 and is a fight spell. I've already mentioned how fight spells in mono green decks are some of the most effective ways of removing cards. And of course, being a bolt land on the backside is great. And then finally, Disciple of Freyalise. It's Disciple of Bolas. That's all it is. Enters the battlefield, gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the creature's power that you sacrifice. Sacrifice anything that you need, and it will just work for you. In Golgari Aristocrats decks that have big targets that they're reanimating, that they want to recur, like, say, Gary, Disciple of Freyalise is going to do a lot of work in those decks. And even in mono green decks, having access to more Return of the Wild, Soul of the Mighty, Rishkar's Expertise style effects is not bad. Even though you sacrifice the card draw may end up saving you in a game. While it may be overcasted, it is, in fact, a land on the backside. So if you need more mana and you're worried about that, just play it as a land and it'll be fine. And honestly, there's so much in this set that I like, but this is all the stuff for a budget that I found. 72 cards, $28. This gets you a huge swath of new toys for your deck if you so chose. I'll have a list of everything that I included in here in the description for those who want easy access to it. But all things considered, if you're enjoying Modern Horizons 3, let me know in the comment section below. I still think it's overcosted for what it is, but that's why I'm talking about a whole bunch of cheap singles that I think you should be buying, because they're really, really nice. And most LGSs make a better return on investment for singles than they do for sealed product anyway, so you'll be helping out your game store as well. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hopefully you're as excited for the MDFCs as I am, but just also those fetching lands are fantastic. They can cycle, they can do everything. I've got so much I've had to do to my decks because of this set. Me and my partner sat down on release day, and I had to update 10 decks of mine, and I haven't even touched the $15 decks yet because I don't know what these prices are going to settle into yet. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, y'all, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitta, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.